All right, that time of the year is officially creeping up. All-Star Weekend is about a month from today. And obviously, if you've been paying attention to the news, then you know that this year's All-Star format is drastically different than what we have ever seen it be. So it's going to be like a 4-team format tournament sort of thing where you have one of the teams that is actually going to be the champion of the Rising Stars Challenge and the other 3 teams comprised of the NBA's All-Stars. They're going to compete in a tournament all the way up to a championship game. Me personally, I love the idea. I know a lot of people have come out talking about how lame the idea is. There were some players who came out and expressed their frustrations about it, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. Me personally, as a fan, I don't mind the format being changed year in and year out. If one of the parts of All-Star Weekend every single year is we're going to see the game played in a different way, if that's like a consistent thing on a year in year out basis, I don't mind that. If one of the biggest storylines of All-Star Weekend every single year is the way the format, the structure of the game is going to be different, I think that's neat. I love seeing the game of basketball played in a different way. Best example of that, the Unrivaled League. I talked about that actually a few days ago on my channel. Essentially, it is a league comprised of some of the biggest names in the WNBA. They're playing 3-on-3 basketball in a full-court setting. The rules are different, right? It's an Elam ending. I like seeing the game of basketball played in different ways. It's really cool seeing players' skill sets being applied in like these different settings. So I think it works for NBA All-Star Weekend. Again, if one of the biggest marketing tactics for the NBA every single year on All-Star Weekend is the game is going to be played in a different way, I am down for it, right? You need to do things like this to breed excitement for the game, and I think this is something that is absolutely perfect. But my rule on All-Star games stays completely the same, and I talked about this actually last year after that pitiful All-Star game we just had. I don't care what the format is, as cool as I think it is now. The games don't get competitive just by virtue of you changing up the format. The game is as competitive as the players make it. Period, point blank, right? There is no format the NBA can put in place to make players want to compete more, right? Like you can put stuff in there and there's a higher likelihood that players are going to compete, but it all comes down to their effort. We have seen the league constantly change up their formula. They moved over to an Elam ending countless times, a bunch of stuff, and players are still kind of half-assing their effort a little bit out there on the court. Last year was just pitiful, man. Like there is no excuse for it at all. It was so bad, like we didn't even see LeBron in the entirety of the game. We didn't even see Giannis, I don't think, in the entirety of the game. I'd have to go back and look. It just has not been what it should have been, right? And last year, to me, was like the ultimate tipping point. And I know I say that every single year, but last year was just bad. So no matter what the format is, no matter what the change is, as cool as it may look, nothing is going to make this game more competitive unless players want to come out there and compete. So your biggest question is this: who are going to be like the 3 or 4 guys who are going to try to set the tone throughout the game, right? Or throughout the games, because it is a tournament structure. Who are going to be those players? Those are the guys to root for, in my opinion. Who's going to be that guy to go out there and set this competitive tone? That's the biggest thing to watch out for once that tournament gets started. I'm excited to see it. So we shall see how that entire thing ends up playing out once All-Star Sunday night gets going. Also wanted to talk about this. These starters were obviously announced just the other night, and I was a bit disappointed in some of the things that I saw. So as far as the Eastern Conference, I was fine with who they selected. Let me look at this real quick. You got Jalen Brunson, Donovan Mitchell, Jason Tatum, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Karl Anthony Towns. That's a valid list for the Eastern Conference, right? I don't have any issues with that list. It's the West that I have a problem with. Steph Curry should not be starting. I love Steph. I do think he is the greatest point guard of all time. He is one of the greatest, well, I actually think the second greatest basketball player that I grew up and witnessed. Look, I started watching basketball back in like 2012. The 2 best basketball players I have personally witnessed: LeBron James and Stephen Curry. You could throw Kevin Durant in there. You could throw a lot of different players in there, but I think those 2 are my 2 best. I have both of them in my all-time top 5. I love Steph Curry. He did something unbelievable on the Olympic stage, furthering his case for being the best point guard of all time. But this season, he's been an all-star. There's no arguing that, but all-star starter recognition, I don't know, right? It's been a pretty relatively mid-year for Steph. He'd have a case if the Warriors were much better than what they were this season, but that's not the case. The Warriors have been pretty bad, pretty inconsistent. This has just not been a great Golden State season, and it just hasn't been an amazing year from Stephen Curry individually. Again, that's all relative because we've seen him average 30 in some years and have these MVP caliber seasons. Not the case for him this particular season. Also, I know the NBA has kind of flirted with this a little bit, but I don't know if LeBron should be a starter this year. And it seems crazy to say, but there are two players in the West who I just think have a stronger argument for being named as starters, and that's Anthony Edwards and Victor Wembanyama. To me, there's no way in the world these two didn't make really compelling cases for being voted in as all-star starters. Wembanyama is literally the defensive player of the year. The stat line he is putting up is off the charts. He's going to be an all-star for sure, but starter recognition, I think he is deserving of that. Also, so is Anthony Edwards. I love the season he's having individually. Yes, the Timberwolves have been extremely mediocre and disappointing as a collective, but and individually, he's been great, and that three-point shooting is just off the chain. I think he's like taking the most off the dribble three-point shots in the league, and there's something about his efficiency. He's really high up in there as far as efficiency off the dribble with three-pointers. He's like 40-something% from three for the first time in his career. Individually, I think you've got to throw Anthony Edwards in that starting role as well. And it's going to be weird because obviously, like I said, these guys are going to be divided into different teams. I don't even know how the starting lineups in the game itself or the games themselves is even going to look. But all-star starter recognition, if we're just using that as a way to recognize the 10 best players right now or the 5 best players in either conference, Anthony Edwards and Wembanyama, to me, this particular season, have been better than LeBron and Stephen Curry. This season, do not take this as me saying over like the last few years, definitely not of all time, but this season, I just don't think LeBron and Curry have made better arguments and cases for having starter recognition over Wembanyama and Anthony Edwards. The argument against Wemby starting over Curry is kind of legit. Like I guess I can see why people would be opposed to that. Wembanyama is great individually, but the Spurs are like 20 and 22, and they're a couple spots below the Golden State Warriors right now out west. Now, I am going to say the Western Conference is very weird right now as far as records go. Outside of like maybe that top 3 or 4, no team has been definitively way better than any other team from like that 6 to like 10 spot, right? I have to go back and look at the standings, but teams are pretty crunched together as far as records go, like beneath that top 5. So you could argue though either way that because Curry is on a relatively better team with the Warriors having slightly a better record than the Spurs, I guess you can make that argument with Curry being over Wembanyama. But still, individually and just judging by the eye test and what I've seen, Wembanyama still has my vote as a starter out west. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how things end up stacking up as we see the rest of the All-Stars being announced. There are going to be a lot of players who probably won't make the All-Star game this year that we're used to seeing make the All-Star game. Luka, right? Like, does he get an All-Star spot? We've barely seen him play this season, and we're going to see some newer guys definitely in the mix, like with the Houston Rockets. They have been amazing out west. Does Jalen Green get an All-Star nod? Does Alperen Şengün also get an All-Star nod? How about the Clippers, right? Do they send Norman Powell up there? They've been great individually. Well, he's been great individually, and that team has been amazing. Do you throw him in that conversation? Do you also throw James Harden in that conversation? It's a lot of weird stuff going on right now because there are a lot of great performers that aren't traditionally known as All-Stars that have been putting up All-Star caliber seasons. That's also a thing out in the Eastern Conference. With the Cavaliers, look at them. We know for a fact Garland is going to get in, but what happens with Evan Mobley? Does he get in the game because that's how great the Cavs have been as a team? I've made this argument. If you're like the best team in your conference, like they are, you should be sending multiple players to the All-Star game. By multiple, probably like 3 or 4, right? Like that's really what I feel like. That's how great this team has been. There's an argument for both Mobley and Allen to be voted into the game alongside with Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. So we'll see. It's going to be very, very interesting. And I think Having all of these all-stars named is going to give us a really interesting look as far as the scope of talent right now in the NBA. And it's also going to put us into perspective, or put things into perspective, about how much different things are now relative to other years. As I said, guys who were traditionally all-stars over the last few seasons probably won't make it this year. Embiid's not going to make it. Like, there are so many players who we're used to seeing be like these all-star guys and all-star starter players who are like also top 5 level at times. A lot of those guys probably aren't even going to make it, whether it's injuries or whatever the case may be. That's how weird this season has been. So we'll see. It'll be interesting, but either way, I'm excited about the format. I'm excited about the changes, and let's hope that this is going to be the weekend that finally, quote unquote, revives All-Star Weekend. Because here's also the thing about that. We'll have a good All-Star Weekend, and we'll say All-Star Weekend is back, just for the next All-Star Weekend to be absolutely pitiful, right? So there's that as well. I'm not going to get my hopes up about All-Star Weekend as a concept until I see at least 3 consecutive seasons of it being really good. That's where I'm at with it, because like I said, man, we'll see these great All-Star weekends, and the follow-ups the next year are pitiful as hell. So we'll see what ends up happening, but it'll be interesting seeing who else gets named. I can't wait to see the format and this new tournament structure, and let's hope that this is going to be a good classic All-Star weekend, one that we've not seen in a very, very long time.